Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming out. Let me ask you a question. How are you doing? Good. How do you know? Right? What's the data that tells you how you're doing, right? Is the chair uncomfortable, or it's a little too early, or I stayed out too late last night? You're collecting a lot of information right now, even as you're sitting in that chair, not just listening to me, but about your environment. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? You know, do I need to recross my legs? Do I need to do stuff like that? This is really about getting more attuned with that feedback, right? With listening to it. Because feedback, I mean, you look at the word didn't exist before like 1920, right? It really kind of came out, and we caused this word feedback, this cause and effect thing, to happen as a result of what was happening in electronics and things like that. But since then, it's been taken on by behavioral scientists, by computer scientists. Feedback is now sort of how we live. And if you think about it, even before the word was defined, we were very good at feedback generations ago, eons ago, because everything we learn is as a result of feedback, right? There is no child that stood up and walked without first falling. Right? There is no child that immediately began speaking without first listening to and practicing the language in his head or her head. And we're just great at learning how to do things, but the process of that learning is all about feedback. We try things, we see it didn't work, we try it another way. That's how we get our balance, it's how we get our syntax, it's how we get our tone, it's how we develop relationships. With a family, with a team, with a not-for-profit board, with the people we work with the people we go to school with. We're always out there trying new things, getting some feedback, and then improving our performance. We're adjusting little things. You know, the way I think about this is that those Apollo rockets, you know, that take off and actually land on the moon. Well, you know, some computer scientists drew a line and said, this is the flight path. That rocket, based on my research, I haven't been able to find this, but I've heard that rocket is actually on the flight path 4% of the time. Right? That means that 96% of the time, it's off course and making small adjustments up and down based on feedback. Right? Based on you know, getting through the atmosphere or heading a certain way. And you've got these little retro rockets that are firing to get it back on track. So we use feedback. We're just naturally attuned to using feedback to get on course. But somewhere along the way, and I think it's in about the 6th grade, we lose that ability to use feedback effectively. Because somewhere in school, making the wrong answer comes with a price. Now you're a B, now you're a C, right? You don't get to experiment with that. We need to test. We need to make sure that those things happen. And at about that same time, you know, we're a little pre-adolescent, these hormones start firing, right? And so where you normally go to somebody and say, hey, you know, you're being a bully, or now we want to be liked. Now socially, it's not as acceptable to give that feedback. So we kind of learn through feedback that if we're candid with people, if we tell them what we really think, you know, the classic, does this make me look fat? You know, you learn very quickly not to answer that the way you might normally. So our ability to give one another feedback, to ask for feedback, diminishes over time, especially in the workplace, especially on not-for-profit boards where we get together with people for 2 hours, you know, one night, once a month. It's 24 hours a year we get together. How much time are we really going to invest in saying, you know, you are never on topic? Or, you know, when we get together for these 2-hour meetings, after a half an hour, you say, all right, long story short, well, it's too late. You know, you've already taken all of my time to do that. What can we do about that? Well, my premise is that we look at people who are good at giving and getting feedback. We look at people like actors, musicians, chefs, okay? Because they get feedback all the time. They're constantly refining that recipe, improving their performance, asking their peers, how am I doing? Asking themselves, how am I doing? How do I know? Right? Did that audience applaud? Was that presentation well received? Did the figures that I summed up, you know, make the point that I wanted to make? So I think that those people, the people, you know, the rock climbers, the jazz musicians who are attuned to this, follow a formula without even knowing it. Again, it's because they're natural learners. And I've looked at this in a lot of different settings, on not-for-profit boards, in large global corporations, in my family, right, in my schools. And I think the formula goes something like this. We need frequent feedback about relevant results. Okay, let's look at that. Frequent feedback about relevant results. Frequent. I worked for a large organization, the union shop, and they were contracted that they had to give feedback on an individual performance every 6 months. And I met several people who hadn't had a performance review, who hadn't heard from their boss how they were doing. I met one person who hadn't heard for 3 years. How do you know? You just kind of show up and hope you're getting better? I think that there's something to, and then there are other people that say, well, no, I meet with my boss and we get together once a week, we have a one-on-one. Well, what do you talk about? The Bills, the Giants. It's not a discussion about relevant results. Okay? So I think that we need to move away from some sort of annual or even quarterly opportunity, and we need to be either asking for or offering feedback at least monthly. You know, we owe it to the people that we work with on that not-for-profit board, or the people that we sit next to in our design shop or our architectural firm or our large corporation, to sit down at least once a month and talk about performance. How are you doing? How am I doing? Right? It's a give and take. It's not the feedback where I'm now going to tell you. Right? It's a dialogue. It's an interchange. It needs to be. And I think that if you do that 12 times a year, you stand a much better chance at focusing. I think that if you can find a half an hour once a week, 52 times a year, right? 168 hours in a week, you can find 30 minutes to sit down and talk about performance. Now you have 52 opportunities to improve your performance. Frequency. If you think about those athletes, you know, they're looking at game tapes, they're getting feedback in the huddle, they're getting feedback between plays, they're getting feedback right at the moment of performance. That's the right frequency, right? Now, what is the feedback, right? Oh, I'm not comfortable, or I went to this YouTube site, or my company had training on how to give feedback, and it's become almost too formulaic. You know, it's like writing out their performance review and putting that information in there and trying to figure out what's going on. I think that feedback is very simple. All right, let me give you 4 things here. I think you need to ask, can I give you some feedback? Right? And if you want to give someone feedback and they just really made a mistake, they just really embarrassed you publicly in front of a client or something, you can't give them feedback until you can chuckle about that. Don't give feedback in the moment. So give them feedback when you can smile. And then ask, can I give you some feedback? And then when you give the feedback, don't fall into the mistake of giving feedback about some sort of attribute or overall. Give feedback about a specific behavior. And then talk about the consequence of that behavior. Because again, feedback is cause and effect, stimulus and response, action and reaction. Right? You want to be able to say to them, hey, can I give you some feedback? When we're in a meeting and you interrupt the other people in the meeting, I notice that they stop contributing as much. What can you do differently? That took about 20 seconds. Can I give you some feedback? Person would say yes. I highlighted a specific behavior. When you interrupt, when you fold your arms, when you pull out your BlackBerry, whatever that specific thing is, leads to a specific result. People tune out. You know, when you arrive late to the meeting, people feel like you're not respecting their time. They wind up coming late to the next meeting. Right? Cause and effect. What can you do differently? You notice I'm not telling them to be more on time. I don't have a problem. They have a problem that they need to fix. Now, mind you, feedback is also, when you're in a meeting and you grab the pen and you go to the whiteboard and you capture those great ideas, it really brings a positive energy into the room. Keep it up. Feedback is both reinforcing and corrective. And then the real thing we need to be giving feedback about is something relevant. right? If I'm the boss and I have a goal of raising $100,000 for my not-for-profit, and I go to my staff, and I've got somebody dedicated to web, and somebody on community relations, and somebody on grants, and I say, I've got a goal of raising $100,000, how engaged are they going to be? Not so much. But if I sit down with them and say, we need to raise $100,000, and I think we can raise 50% of that through the web, and 25% of that through grants, and 25% of that through... Now, how are we going to do that? Right now, have I made it relevant to them? Have I established a common purpose that's going to get them a little bit more involved? Have I made this specific to their job? Yeah. And then the results. This is the key. The results aren't the effort. I worked really hard on that. Let me tell you what I did. Unless it's a specific behavior, what you did, I'm really not interested. I want to see the product, that outcome, that actual shipping thing, that service that we're going to give to the client. I want to see those slides. I want to see that proposal written. Right? So again, frequent feedback about relevant results is the way that we can sort of engage other people in one-on-one settings to sort of build a rapport so that we can talk about performance differently, talk about it specifically, talk about it in a constructive way, not an accusatory way. So if you go out there and you want to do this over the next week, you want to practice frequent feedback about relevant results, let me give you some advice. Don't sit down with your colleague and say, I want to talk about 7 things. I want to talk about 5 behaviors. Pick one. Pick one for them, pick one for you. I want to become a better listener, okay? And then sit down weekly for half an hour and get some feedback about how I'm doing, right? Ask for feedback. Offer feedback, adjust. And I think that if we can start building that practice of frequent feedback about relevant results, we can really change the dialogue about performance. Thank you for your time.